Lena Moore had always hated hospitals, not because of the smell or the sterile silence or even the fluorescent lights that seemed to flatten every human expression. No, what Lena feared most, what kept her away for years, was the feeling of exposure, of being seen too closely. But some fears aren't strong enough to compete with pain. And tonight, after another sleepless week filled with discomfort, she found herself sitting in the waiting room of Ridgeview Women's Health Center, clutching a clipboard like it was a shield. Her hands trembled as she stared at the intake form. Simple questions: name, date of birth, medical history. Yet her mind scattered like leaves in the wind. She forced herself to write slowly, each letter taking effort. The receptionist's voice still echoed in her ears. Dr. Reed is one of the best in the city. You'll be in good hands. She had pictured someone older, stern, professional in the way only age could grant. She hadn't expected what came next. A nurse stepped into the room, holding a file. Lena Moore. Lena jumped. Her whole body stiffened. The clipboard nearly slipped from her lap. She rose, knees shaky, and followed the nurse down a long hallway. The scent of antiseptic filled her lungs. Every closed exam room she passed tightened the knot in her stomach. When they reached the office, the nurse gestured toward a chair. Dr. Reed will be in shortly. Lena nodded, but her throat had closed up again. She sat with perfect posture, as if slouching might make her disappear. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlocked so tightly they hurt. She stared at the exam chair in the corner of the room, feeling her breath grow shallow. And then the door opened. She forgot how to breathe entirely. The man who stepped in didn't match the mental image she had spent all day rehearsing. Dr. Julian Reed was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a dark navy button-up that somehow managed to look casual and expensive all at once. His hair was a little tousled, like he'd just run his hands through it, and his eyes, steady, blue, too observant, met hers with quiet ease. "Miss Moore," he said, voice calm, kind, utterly professional. "I'm Dr. Reed. It's nice to meet you." Lena blinked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her heart was already racing, but now her skin tingled, her limbs locked. He wasn't supposed to look like this. He wasn't supposed to feel like this. Julian sat across from her and opened the file. "I see this is your first time seeing a gynecologist." She nodded too fast. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He didn't comment. His tone softened. "That's completely okay. We'll go at your pace today. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. My only job is to make sure you feel safe." She gave a tight, jerky nod again, wishing the floor would open beneath her. Julian noticed everything. The way her shoulders were pulled in, the way her gaze darted away, the way her voice never made it out of her throat. She was quiet, yes, but there was a storm just beneath her stillness, a vulnerability that made him slow down instinctively. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. She clenched her hands tighter. "Fine," she whispered. "A lie." He chuckled lightly. not at her, but in that disarming, human way that said, "You don't need to pretend with me. You don't have to be nervous," he said. "I promise I'm not that scary." But that was the problem. He wasn't scary because he was cold or unkind. He was scary because she felt too much. Because when he looked at her like that, like she was a person and not just a patient, her walls shook. And the worst part, he noticed. He noticed her blushing, noticed how she flinched when he reached for a pen, noticed how she sat like someone expecting to be judged at any moment. And for some inexplicable reason, it made him want to protect her. Julian cleared his throat, gently putting distance between his thoughts and his role. "Before we begin," he said, "do you have any questions for me?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, then shook her head. He studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful but careful. Then he smiled. "All right, let's begin." What followed was the longest appointment of her life. Not because of the procedure, but because of the way her senses betrayed her. The warmth in his voice, the steady way he explained everything, the way he checked in before each step. It should have made her feel calmer. Instead, she was acutely aware of everything, too aware. When it was over, she practically bolted. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the pavement gold, but Lena couldn't enjoy it. Her cheeks still burned. Her thoughts spun in chaos. She had just met someone who made her feel seen, too seen, and she hated it. She told herself she would never go back. Not ever. But pain doesn't negotiate. 2 weeks later, her symptoms worsened. No amount of stubbornness could fix that. So once again, she found herself sitting in that pristine waiting room, praying for a different doctor. But fate doesn't ask for permission. Lena Moore, the nurse, called, and there he was again. Dr. Julian Reed, impossibly calm, impossibly kind. He looked up from his file when she entered and offered a soft smile. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me." She froze, her hands curled into fists at her sides. I wasn't," she mumbled. He didn't press, only nodded, but there was something in his eyes, quiet amusement maybe, or curiosity. She couldn't tell. "You missed your follow-up," he said. "We called." "I've been busy," she lied again. Julian could tell, but he let it go. Instead, he watched her fidget with the hem of her sleeve, noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she couldn't meet his gaze, and he felt it again, that quiet pull. He had treated thousands of patients, but no one quite like her. There was something delicate about Lena Moore, not fragile in the way things break, but in the way things guard themselves fiercely, only showing softness when no one's watching. And the worst part, he wanted to watch. He wanted to understand what she was protecting so carefully. Lena, meanwhile, felt like she was barely holding herself together. She knew she was projecting, knew he was just doing his job, but it didn't matter. Her thoughts were no longer safe around him. So when the appointment ended, she left again. But this time, he watched her go with something like disappointment curling low in his chest. He didn't expect to see her again. not so soon. Yet life is rarely predictable. One crisp morning, just before heading to the hospital, Julian stopped at his usual cafe. And there, in the corner near the window, curled around a book, was Lena. She hadn't noticed him. She was lost in the page, her lips slightly parted in focus, a strand of hair falling across her face. She looked peaceful. She looked nothing like the anxious girl in his office. And that moment, just that one glance, shifted something in him. Because suddenly, Lena wasn't just a patient. She was a person. A real person with thoughts and fears, and a whole life beyond sterile rooms and white coats. And for the first time, he didn't want to know her professionally. He just wanted to know her. Lena didn't see him at first. The light from the cafe window glowed softly around her as she sipped her coffee, her eyes scanning a page with quiet concentration. She was somewhere else entirely, in a world of stories, of fictional choices and imagined emotions, until she heard a voice that didn't belong to the world she was reading about. "Didn't think I'd find you here." She froze mid-sip. The familiar voice knocked the breath right out of her. Her eyes darted up. Julian stood beside her table, coffee in hand, a slight tilt to his smile that felt too knowing, too real. For a moment, she didn't say a word. Then, too suddenly, she choked on her drink. Julian tried not to laugh. "You okay?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her without waiting for permission. Lena wiped her mouth, mortified. "I didn't expect to see you here," she stammered. "I could say the same," he replied, glancing around. "This is my spot. I come here most mornings." Lena looked away, hoping he didn't notice the blush creeping into her cheeks. "I like the quiet," she murmured. "Me too." And just like that, a soft silence settled between them. It wasn't awkward, at least, not on his part. It felt gentle. Lena dared to look at him then. Really look. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. His wristwatch gleamed under the light. He looked sharp, confident, like someone who belonged to a different world than hers. A world of certainty and success, of never having to second-guess your worth. But here he was, looking at her, as if she was the most interesting thing in the room. And that terrified her more than anything else. She couldn't understand why someone like him would pay attention to someone like her, and she had no idea that he was thinking the exact opposite. Because Julian couldn't stop wondering how someone like her could still look so calm while carrying so much silence. Days passed. Then one night, Lena was scrolling through her phone, half asleep, when she saw it. An article. Her heart stopped. Dr. Julian Reed, the millionaire behind Reed Health Group. The headline alone sent her stomach dropping. She clicked, eyes scanning every word. A prodigy, a leader in women's health, several clinics under his name, board certified, international conferences, a net worth she couldn't even imagine. This wasn't just the kind doctor who had treated her so gently. This was someone untouchable. And she was a girl who worked at a used bookstore, trying to scrape rent together every month. She was ordinary. The difference between them had never felt so sharp. Suddenly, all the warmth she had felt toward him turned cold in her hands. Not because he had changed, but because she realized how foolish she'd been to think they stood on equal ground. The next morning, she didn't go to the cafe, and the next. She stopped answering his check-in messages, stopped returning calls from the clinic, stopped showing up. Julian noticed immediately. At first, he told himself she was busy, but the longer the silence stretched, the more he knew. She was avoiding him, and it hit him harder than he expected. He could have let it go. He could have moved on, the way he always did. But he didn't, because something about Lena had stayed with him. Her presence lingered in the quietest parts of his day, and the thought of never seeing her again made his chest ache. So one evening, after her shift ended, Lena stepped out of the bookstore and found him waiting. He leaned against a sleek black car, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Julian," she said, stunned. His voice was calm, but something deeper simmered beneath it. "Are you avoiding me?" She looked away, the truth burning in her throat. "No, I've just been." "Don't lie to me, Lena." His words weren't harsh, but they were firm, honest, and that honesty broke something in her. "Why does it matter?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You're you, and I'm just me." He frowned, stepping closer. "What does that mean?" She exhaled sharply, trying to hold her ground. "I don't want to be the girl people think is chasing you for your money, or your name, or whatever they think I want." For a second, Julian just stared at her. Then he laughed. A soft, bewildered sound that made her stomach twist. "Why are you laughing?" "Because," he said quietly, "I think you're the first person who's ever run away from me because of my money." She didn't have a response, because she didn't expect the look in his eyes. He didn't look powerful. He didn't look composed. He looked tired, human, and for the first time, she realized maybe she wasn't the only one afraid. Lena tried everything to keep her distance. She turned down his invitations, ignored his texts, avoided his world. But every time she saw his name on her phone, her fingers hovered. Every time she walked past the clinic, her eyes searched the windows. Every time she tried to forget, she remembered more. Because Julian Reed wasn't someone she could simply forget. And he wasn't done fighting. He didn't chase. Not anymore. Instead, he showed up in small ways. At the bookstore, pretending to browse. At the cafe, in his usual corner, never pushing. Just there. And little by little, her walls began to crack. One day she laughed. Not politely, not nervously, but genuinely. And Julian felt something like hope. But just as things began to shift, something happened. Late one evening, after a long day, Lena stepped onto the street. The world tilted, her vision blurred. Then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital room. Soft light, steady beeping, clean sheets, and Julian sitting beside her bed. His hair was messy. His eyes were shadowed with worry. When he saw her eyes open, he let out a shaky breath. "Lena," he whispered, "you scared me." Her throat was dry. "What happened?" "You collapsed," he said. "High fever, dehydration, exhaustion." She tried to sit up. He reached out, steadying her. And in that moment, she saw something in him she had never let herself believe. Care. Real, unfiltered, devastating care. And it broke her. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. His brows furrowed. "What? You don't have to do this," she said. "Sit here, take care of me, act like I matter." His expression darkened not with anger, but with disbelief. "Is that what you think?" he asked. "That I'm here out of obligation?" She looked away. "I don't need your charity." His jaw tensed. "This isn't charity, Lena. This is me caring about you." She laughed softly, bitterly. "Why?" His voice was low, steady. "Because I like you." She froze. Those 4 words wrapped around her ribs and didn't let go. But she couldn't accept it. "Not yet. Why me?" she whispered. "You have everything. Money, success, women who would give anything just to be near you." His breath hitched. And then he said something that changed everything. "You think I have everything," he murmured, "but you don't know what it's like to feel not enough." She looked at him, stunned, and for the first time she saw it. The cracks in the armor, the story behind the man. He wasn't just a doctor. He was someone who had been broken too. The hospital room was quiet, but inside Lena, everything was loud. She stared at him, this man she thought she understood. The man with calm eyes and a perfect life. And suddenly, he wasn't perfect anymore. He wasn't untouchable. He was real. "I wasn't always like this," Julian said, voice soft. "I didn't grow up with wealth. My parents worked double shifts. My first lab coat had a coffee stain I could never get out." He gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I earned everything with scholarships, side jobs, and no sleep. When I started my first clinic, I thought, this is it. Success, validation." His voice lowered. "And then I met someone." Lena felt her chest tighten. She was smart, charming, said all the right things. I thought she saw me. Julian's jaw clenched. She saw my income. The words dropped like weights between them. "She lied," he said. "She had someone else the whole time. I was just a brand, a wallet, a name on a building." Lena didn't move, didn't breathe. He looked up then, eyes locking with hers. "I haven't let anyone close since." She wanted to speak, wanted to say something, but her voice failed. "I told myself I didn't need love," he continued, "that it was safer, cleaner, easier to keep things professional." He laughed softly, bitterly, "And then you walked in." Lena's hands clenched the blanket. "You reminded me what it felt like to be seen, not admired, not desired, just noticed. And that scared the hell out of me." She finally whispered, "Why?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, "I knew if I let you in, I wouldn't be able to walk away." The words hung there, fragile, dangerous. She looked down, unable to hold his gaze. "I'm not like the women you've known," she said. "I don't have money, or power, or confidence." Julian didn't flinch. "That's exactly why I trust you." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "But I don't trust myself," she admitted. I've never let anyone in. I don't know how to be enough. You already are, he said gently. She shook her head. I'm scared I'll fall, and you'll realize I'm not who you thought. I already know who you are, he replied, and I'm still here. Her breath hitched. She had no more arguments, no more shields, only silence. That night, when Julian stepped out of the room to get coffee, Lena stared at the ceiling. The hook returned, whispering quietly, what if the one person you fear is the one who sees you most clearly? She could feel her walls cracking. But the next morning, she was gone. The nurses said she checked out early, against advice. Julian stood in the hallway, staring at the empty room, the faint imprint of her on the bed, and knew she was running again. And this time, he wasn't sure if she'd come back. Weeks passed. Julian returned to work, but something had changed. He smiled less, laughed less. His colleagues noticed, but didn't ask. Every patient reminded him of the one who vanished. Meanwhile, Lena tried to return to normal. She worked long hours, avoided familiar streets, blocked his number, but nothing felt normal anymore. Because for the first time in her life, she missed someone she hadn't even allowed herself to love. She missed the way he looked at her like she mattered, missed the way his voice softened when he said her name. And every time she remembered the look on his face when she pushed him away, guilt wrapped around her like ice. She told herself she was protecting him, but really she was protecting herself. And every day, the lie felt heavier, until one night, walking home in the rain, she passed by the cafe. It was nearly closing time. Only one table was occupied. Julian sat by the window, sipping coffee, alone. His eyes caught hers through the glass. Neither of them moved, neither of them smiled, but something passed between them, and that something refused to fade. The next morning, Julian was at the bookstore. He didn't speak at first, just browsed. Lena watched from behind the counter, heart pounding. Finally, he picked up a novel, walked over, placed it gently on the desk. I think this one has your name in the first chapter, he said. She almost laughed. Almost. But she handed him the book silently. He didn't ask her to come back, didn't push. He just said, "Take care, Lena," and left. That night, she opened the book. The first line read, "She didn't believe in beginnings, not anymore." And Lena closed her eyes, because somewhere deep down, a voice whispered, "Maybe you do." A few days later, she returned to the cafe. Julian wasn't there, but she sat by the window anyway and waited. The sky was turning amber when Lena saw him again. She hadn't planned it. She didn't dress for it, didn't rehearse what to say. She was walking, aimless, after another long shift at the bookstore, when something, an impulse, a breath, pulled her toward the clinic. She stood across the street, just looking. Lights were still on inside. Patients came and went. But then she saw him, Julian, standing at the far end of the hallway, speaking to a nurse. Calm, focused, just like always. And yet his shoulders were a little heavier. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He turned toward the front desk, and that's when he saw her. He froze, just for a second. Then, slowly, he moved toward the door. Lena's heart was pounding before he even stepped outside. He crossed the street without speaking. The silence between them said too much. "You're here," he said finally. "I don't know why," she replied. But they both knew. Julian looked at her, not with blame, but with something far quieter, something like hope held back too long. "I missed you," he said. Lena's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to disappear," she whispered. "Yes, you did," he said gently. "But I understand." And that broke her, because he wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He was still kind, still waiting. "I was scared," she said, voice trembling. "Scared that you'd look at me one day and realize I'm just a girl with nothing to offer." Julian's expression didn't shift. "You still think that's what I want?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I just don't know how to be loved." He stepped closer. "You don't have to know how," he said. "You just have to let me try." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I ran away because I felt small," she whispered. "Because I thought I didn't matter. You matter to me." "But why?" He looked at her like she was asking the wrong question. "Because you see me," he said. "Because you look at me and don't want the money or the title. You just look." Lena's hands trembled. "And I've never had that before," he added. "Never had someone who made me feel like more than a name." Her voice cracked. "I'm still afraid." "So am I." She looked up at him, and in that moment, something shifted. They were no longer doctor and patient, no longer opposites across some impossible line. They were just two people, hurt, hopeful, human. Julian held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. She hesitated, but she took it. His apartment was quiet, warm. Soft light spilled across shelves filled with books and photos she couldn't quite see. They sat on the couch. No music, no distractions, just presence, just breath. "I think I love you," Lena said suddenly. The words escaped before she could stop them. Julian froze, her face flushed with panic. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to say it like that." He reached for her hand, gentle. "No," he said. "Don't take it back." Her eyes met his. "You don't have to love me back," she added. "I just needed to say it once, to know it wasn't just in my head." Julian shook his head slowly. "You think I don't feel it. I think I scare you." He exhaled. "You do." She blinked. "But not for the reasons you think," he said. "You scare me because I want you in every version of my future. And that's not something I say lightly." She didn't know what to say, so she leaned into him, rested her head against his chest, listened to the rhythm of someone who had waited and broken and still chosen softness. Julian whispered into her hair, "You're not the girl with nothing. You're the girl who made me believe again." And in that moment, she stopped running. The weeks that followed were quieter than she expected. No grand declarations, no dramatic scenes, just slow mornings with coffee and silence. Just walks where their fingers found each other without words. Just laughter that came easier now. Julian never rushed her, never made her explain the things she couldn't name. He only stayed. And Lena found herself unfolding day by day. letting go of the voice that said she wasn't enough, replacing it with the memory of how he looked at her when she thought she had nothing to give. But even peace has shadows. One evening, as they sat by the window, Julian turned to her. "There's something I want to ask," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not asking now," he added quickly. "I just want you to know it's in my heart." "What is?" He reached into his coat, pulled out a small velvet box, didn't open it, just held it. "I'm not ready to ask," he said. "Not until you're ready to say yes." Her breath caught. "I'm not afraid of loving you," he added. "But I don't want a version of this where you say yes to please me." Lena took the box from his hand, held it for a moment, then placed it gently on the table. "Don't wait too long," she whispered. He smiled, and for the first time, the fear in both of them felt like something they could hold together. Spring arrived slowly. The city bloomed in shades of soft gold and green. Park benches filled again. Windows opened. The world softened. So did Lena. She still woke sometimes with the weight of old thoughts pressing against her chest, still heard the echo of the voice that told her she wasn't enough. But now there was another voice too, one that whispered things like, "You matter. You're safe. I see you." Julian never pushed her to forget who she had been before him. He only reminded her, again and again, who she was now. And that made all the difference. 1 year to the day after their first real conversation, Julian took her back to the cafe. She thought it was a coincidence until she saw how nervous he was, until she saw the familiar velvet box on the table, no longer hidden, until he knelt beside her chair, right there in the middle of the late morning rush, and took her hand. His voice was steady, but his eyes gave him away. "I never planned on this," he said softly. "I wasn't looking for anyone. And then you walked in." She smiled through tears. "I didn't know what I was missing," he added, "until you reminded me how it felt to be chosen not for my name or my title, but for the way I hold silence, for the way I sit with doubt." He opened the box, a simple, elegant ring, nothing flashy, just real, just them. "Lena Moore," he whispered, "will you marry me?" The room went still. She looked at him, at the man who had seen her at her most unsure, and stayed, at the man who never asked her to be anything but herself. She nodded, tears falling freely. Yes. The cafe erupted in quiet cheers. A barista clapped. But all Lena heard was the soft sound of her heartbeat, and the word she'd once been too afraid to believe in: love. Later that night, they sat by the window in his apartment, her head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing slow circles against her hand, and she whispered, "You know, I used to believe love was only for people who were whole." Julian kissed her forehead, and now I think maybe love is what helps you become whole. He held her closer. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "I'm not. You don't have to know where you're going." "I don't," he smiled. "You just have to keep choosing." She closed her eyes. "I choose you." Silence fell again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt full, like something beautiful had finally taken root. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. There were days when Lena still questioned herself, when the fear crept back in, uninvited. But now there was someone beside her who didn't try to fix it, who only said, "I'm here." Julian had built clinics, given talks, saved lives, but the real miracle, he would later say, was her. The quiet girl who changed everything by walking through his door, who looked at him not as the doctor, not as the millionaire, but as the man who once believed no one could see him until she did. Years later, they still came to that same cafe, same table, same window. Their daughter liked to sit between them, swinging her feet, asking endless questions. Lena would smile, Julian would laugh, and sometimes, in the middle of the ordinary, in the pause between coffee sips and sunlight, Lena would think back to that day, that girl, the one who sat in a waiting room, trembling, sure she'd never be enough, and she'd whisper a quiet thank you to her past self for staying, for showing up.